All right, I'm gonna go and see if I can get through this before the people mowing. Yeah, before the people who are mowing the grass outside my apartment come back around. But seriously, it's annoying because it's like I don't know what pattern they're using, but it's like I hear it. It's coming, more, and then it fades away. I'm like, okay, cool. They're done cutting in my little area, and then a few minutes later they come. Anyway, let's get into this. All right, this will be, I guess, sort of part 3 of my overview of Trump's budget proposal. And in this one, I'll be taking a look at the cuts, or this was a weird one, alright, because for the most part, like, I had to really do some digging on this one, because it's not a specific cut, it's not as straightforward as that, it's a more of a process, and that is the, in the budget, under the section for Department of Transportation, it included a provision or a desire to privatize the country's air traffic control system. Now, currently, the air traffic control, or ATC, is run by the FAA. And it has been for... of all the facts and figures I looked up about this, I forgot to look up when they started. It's been a long-ass time. Let's just put it that way. Now, basically, the concept is, just as is the concept with every other attempt to privatize government functions, is that, oh, well, without the bureaucracy of government in the way, that they'll be more streamlined and more efficient, and it'll save everyone money because they can run it more efficiently and cheaply than the government can. And see, now there are some issues with that way of thinking, in my opinion. For example, private prisons. Because that's always the concept. Oh, well, they can do it for a cheaper price than the government can. Okay, how? It's like they're required to provide the same services. They have to provide food and cells, 3 hots and a cot for every inmate, just like the state would have to do. They have to have correctional officers supervising them, just like the state would have to do. They have to build facilities and maintain them, just like the state would have to do. Or federal government. Why is it supposedly cheaper for them to run it? And in some cases, 1, it may not be cheaper. And 2, it might be cheaper, but again, that the old annoying phrase that Republicans love to throw out, and Democrats like to throw out there when we talk about universal health care, but conveniently forget about when it's their shit that we're talking about. The old phrase, nothing is for free. And it applies to all of this as well. And that is that it costs the same to administer these services, whether the government's doing it or private industry's doing it. The main difference is where you'll be able to save money is things like basically cutting corners. For example, I said private prisons. I have some experience. I'm coming back to that subject because I used to work for state correctional Department of Corrections as a correctional officer. And, the state contracted with a few private companies to handle a couple of usually like pre-release facilities, like minimum security stuff. And the most obvious comparison between like how that private company is making their money while at the same time saving the state money is the way that employees were treated. Like, for instance, with the state, you had decent pay, good benefits, plenty of paid time off, retirement, short and long-term disability, life insurance, all kinds of stuff. Like, really pretty good for the work you do. Now, flip over to something like Geo Group, and honestly, at last I checked, I believe their pay was almost half of what the state pays. And, yeah, benefits, not much better. So that's one way. There's also been areas of, reports of neglect, of inmate neglect and abuse, neglect on the facilities and maintenance, things like that. Because when you look at it, it's like, all things being equal, there really is no way that a private entity can do the same job, provide exactly the same service as a government entity, and do it for less. Or even be able to do it for the same amount of money. Because not only do they have to expend the money to, of course, to the funds and everything to accomplish that task, but they also have to make a profit. The government agency doesn't have to worry about a profit. So as long as they're breaking even, or as long as, once they have enough money to get the job done, that's all they need. It's not so for a private entity. So they've got to make that money somewhere. So then that kind of leads into the FAA and our nation's air traffic control system. Because this is actually not a new thing. In fact, there's a link I'm going to put in the descriptions to a report or not sure. It was a piece, a write-up about the concept of privatizing the FAA, the air traffic control system. That was written, surprise, surprise, by the Heritage Foundation in 1982. So these people have been on the trail of privatizing the FAA since the 80s. Fortunately, until at least so far, they've been unsuccessful, but anyway, we'll go into that. So, why is in this particular case, why would privatizing the air traffic control system be a bad idea? Well, for a few reasons that I have been able to come across. First, on the subject of saving money, let's first take a look at some other nations who have privatized their air traffic control systems. Two of the notable ones are the UK and Canada. And because Canada is similar, sort of comparable in size to the U.S., a lot of times that's the ones who are all for privatizing the FAA, or the air traffic control, we'll call on Canada. That's the example they will hold up as, oh, see, this works. Our neighbors to the north use it. Funny, they never do that with, it's funny, the Republicans never do that with universal health care. Like, okay, anyway, off topic there. But anyway, they hold it up saying, oh, see how well this system works. We could do it. See, Canada's about the same size. First off, they're not. As far as air traffic, as far as commercial air traffic goes, Canada is nowhere near the size of the U.S. So, the information I have found says that basically the system in Canada controls where did I put the number? I put it here somewhere. Damn it. Okay, that annually the private air traffic control system in Canada handles about 12 million flights, all right, per year. U.S. air traffic control handles 132 million flights a year. That's a lot, okay? And it becomes obvious, like, when you think about how complex and how big of a system that we have is, go to a major airport. I live near one of the largest airports in the country. I think it might be in the world. I don't know. But anyway, if you go to the airport or anywhere near it, just in the general region of the state, and look around, you'll see it's like aircraft, like landing light, just us aircraft after aircraft stacked up in a row waiting to come in. Like, they are moving some friggin' flights nonstop. So our system handles a lot of traffic, an insane amount of traffic. So comparing it to Canada is really kind of misleading, because yes, in geographical size, the nation of Canada is similar to the U.S., but they are just, again, 12 million a year versus 132 million a year. Like, they're not even in the same ballpark. All right, now let's go on to some other privatization success stories, like the UK. Well, evidently, the UK's private air traffic control system has had some issues in the past. For example, after the 9/11 attacks, air travel took a bit of a nosedive. Now, when that happened, it actually tanked their profits or their income so much that the UK government had to step in and bail them out. And that leads me to one of my main issues. Because, there's a too big to fail scenario for you there. You think the banks were an issue? Try our nation's air traffic control system. It is the largest and the busiest air traffic control system in the world. So what happens if, oh, look, we misplaced funds, or we didn't, we forgot, like the battery in our calculator died and we forgot to replace it. We're going under. Save us. What are you going to do? So now it basically creates, it puts in place a system that is an absolutely vital part of our country's well-being, and it puts it in the hands of a private organization that's free from, unencumbered from the restrictions and the bureaucracy of a federal government. Exactly. So what's to say they run it properly? Maybe they run the damn thing into the ground, and now we still end up picking up the tab because, hey, either we bail them out or we don't have air travel, which is 50,000 flights a day. It's not an option. So there's that. Also, too, I'm kind of curious. What about equipment? See, that's a thing too that's been considered in a lot of these schemes. Is we have a lot, like, the taxpayers have invested a lot of money, like several $1 billion over the years, in our air traffic control system, in radar stations, in developing new technology, in research and development, in buying facilities and buying hardware, all kinds of stuff. So now that the concept is turning that part of the federal government over to a private entity, what happens to all that equipment? You really think the government's gonna make this company buy it from us? It's doubtful. They'll probably end up just giving it to them, which is a problem, because again, that's taxpayer dollars. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of infrastructure. And that is one of in the various plans for how you would do this, that is one of the options, is, you just basically just give them all of this. So it's a lot. That is a lot of capital, a lot of investment, and that company doesn't have to make because the taxpayers paid for it. Also, too, there's also the issue that because there's also potential issues with the cost to use the system and safety for smaller groups or pilots, because basically all the plans for privatizing the air traffic control usually involve, honestly, a lot of input from, surprise, surprise, air carriers. In fact, all airlines have come out in favor of privatizing air traffic control, with the exception of, oddly enough, of Delta Airlines. Which, kudos to them for not going for this. But anyway, so it's a lot of information I'm trying to get into somewhat coherent order. But anyway, so right now, the safety issue is this. That right now, our air traffic control system is actually not directly funded by tax dollars. Well, by, we pay taxes and it goes to that kind of thing. It is through tax, but it's through fuel tax on aviation fuel. So that fuel tax, which actually to me that kind of makes sense, really, because of, when you think about it, the busier the system is, the more planes are in the air, the more fuels and the bigger demand there is, the more fuel that they're going to be using. So the more funding they get. To me, it kind of makes sense. So this way, it's sort of like does like a hard tie to, so like a hard link between the volume of traffic that the air traffic control system has to handle and the amount of money that they bring in. So under a private system, the idea is that they would charge you usage fees. So if you're like a major, like a commercial liner, you basically you have to interact with air traffic control. However, smaller aircraft, like someone flying a Cessna or like a little regional like cargo service or something like that, they may have little, if any, contact, because they're flying at lower levels. They're not, smaller aircraft, they're flying at lower levels, stuff like that. They might check in with air traffic control just to, just, hey, this is where I'm at, this is where I'm going, good morning to you, stuff like that. But they don't really have to rely on air traffic control. Now, the potential safety risk in going to a private system that's funded off of usage fees is that now you have basically an incentive for smaller companies and individual pilots to not check in with air traffic control. Because, okay, well, if I key up and let them know what's going on, even though I'm not really required to, it's going to cost me money. I'm going to have to pay that usage fee. And I don't want to do that, so I'm just not going to, not going to do it. And that does potentially, a lot of people in the industry have said that is a real potential risk, because, for obvious reasons. The air traffic control also provides things like the instrument, IFR instrument, basically guidance of flight via instrumentation is provided by the air traffic control. So there's risks there. Another thing too is that in addition to, the FAA does more than just air traffic control. They also do R&D into new systems and new technologies that go into aircraft. They also go into they also do things like regulation, safety regs, stuff like that. And see, here's an area. In fact, they actually even do stuff like airport improvement grants. It's interesting. One second. And also too, they do. And see, that's what kind of brings me to sort of my final bit about this. My final major concern is that the air traffic control system, currently run by the FAA, basically requires that the FAA stay funded and staffed properly. Alright? Because, with that system, and we saw it actually in 2013 during the congressional sequester, where they're doing their budget, they're screeching about the budget and our deficits and everything. And, they set up the sequester where if Congress fucked around and didn't come up with a budget plan by a certain date, all of these cuts would go into place across the board. And one of the areas was the FAA. Well, the cuts went into place. The FAA had to start furloughing air traffic controllers, and it just played havoc nationwide on air traffic. On air traffic, there were delays, there were problems, confusion, and issues all over the place. To the point that a few days after the sequester went into effect, Congress actually passed an exemption for the FAA. And that's when I thought of it. We're going across, the air traffic control is an extremely vital part of our infrastructure. And because it's part of the FAA, for the most part, the FAA, you can't screw up the FAA too much. You can't fuck with their budget too much before airplanes start dropping out of the fucking sky. So, and that's mostly because of air traffic control system. So here's the thing. Here's what I'm thinking. Why the Heritage Foundation has been in favor of privatizing the air traffic control, why certain, usually pretty much GOP members of Congress have been in favor of privatizing air traffic control, and why Trump's budget wish list includes privatizing air traffic control. And that is, you then detach. By doing that, you detach the public-facing side of the FAA. The part that if the agency is affected, the part that puts a big dent or it produces a big problem for a lot of people, you take that and you take it away from the FAA. So now that portion that everyone's going to know is going to notice if it gets cut or if it gets screwed with. Now that part's out of the way, you're now left with the rest of the FAA. The FAA that does regulation. The FAA that does research and development into aeronautics and aeronautics safety. The FAA that does grant programs for improving small airlines and improving small airports. And then you can start to cut them. Then you can start reducing that budget, cutting it back, just like all the other government agencies out there. So then you can kind of shrink that, you can shrink that pesky government agency with all their friggin' government overreach and job killing regulation. The kind that the kind of regulation that prevents airlines from flying planes that are unsafe. The kind of regulation that goes to an airline and says, hey, this make and model of aircraft, there's an issue where a door flies off in flight, so all of them are grounded until you fix it. Then they can get rid of that side and start restricting that side, and hopefully people won't notice. Well, you're going to get the odd plane crash and explosion, but other than that, there's not going to be massive, obvious problems. And I think that's their ultimate end goal. That's it. You separate out the air traffic control, you get the FAA on their own, and the part of the FAA that, one, not many people realize or think about, and the part that a lot of their donors find to be those pesky, overreaching regulations. And then you can cut them. So, that was, 25 minutes on one paragraph of a budget proposal. Some people say I read too much into these things, but check out the links in the description. Tell me what you think. So that's all I got for this video. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Definitely subscribe, that'd be awesome. And I'll see you next time.